podcast where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on. The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
Our mission is always to deliver actionable operational truth. And today we are looking at something that really challenges decades of accepted wisdom in cow management.
We really are. We're diving into a management phase that, let's be honest, many farmers just dread.
Oh, absolutely. Dry off.
Dry off. And this isn't just a technical discussion about, which tubes and treatments to use.
No, not at all. This is about challenging the foundational premise of how we even manage transition cows. We're talking about a future piece that's been causing a bit of a storm. And frankly, I was skeptical when I first saw the number.
I think we both were.
Yeah. This has layers, and it's going to force you, listening right now, to rethink what you accept as just normal loss during the dry period.
We're calling this deep dive the $640 question.
And there's a good reason for that number.
A very specific reason. Because the data we're seeing, particularly from some recent Wisconsin trials, suggests that traditional abrupt dry-off protocols may be costing farms literally hundreds of dollars.
Per cow. In
completely preventable losses. And this isn't just some, theoretical analysis. This is calculating actual losses from mortality, from chronic mastitis, and from reduced lactation performance.
See, when you throw a number like $640 per cow out there, my farmer antenna just goes straight up.
Of course.
It sounds like industry hype, unless you can back it up with a line-by-line accounting of the biological and the economic mechanisms behind it.
And we're going to.
But if it's true, and that's what we're here to unpack, that figure moves instantly from a technical protocol discussion to a core business strategy issue.
Absolutely.
For a 1,000 cow dairy, we are talking about losing more than $500,000 every single year. Money that could potentially be retained just by changing how you handle that dry-off transition.
Exactly. So let's establish the stakes immediately. We're citing recent trial data, and these numbers, they aren't just big, they are staggering. The assumption in the industry has always been that a certain level of infection risk, of stress, loss...
It's just the cost of doing business. It's unavoidable.
Right. It's just baked into the model. But what this new research suggests is that nearly all of that loss is, in fact, preventable.
And the magnitude of the potential gain here, that's what's so compelling. If you told a farmer they could save $640 per cow on feed costs, they'd change their ration tomorrow, no questions asked.
Instantly.
But because this benefit is hidden in avoided costs, avoided deaths, avoided treatment failures, avoided culling, it takes a deeper dive like this to really see the true impact on your operation.
And here's the controversy tease. The central finding that just flips traditional management completely upside down. Yeah. The new method delivering these results, a protocol focusing on metabolic wind down, using proprietary nutritional signaling.
It's the exact opposite of what we've always done.
The opposite of the traditional abrupt dry-off approach. It's not about sealing the udder externally after the trauma. It's about preventing that trauma from happening internally in the first place.
Okay, so what were the results?
In large-scale trials, we're talking 404 cows, it delivered some really significant results. 47% fewer deaths.
Wow.
And 70% less milk leakage in that critical 60-day period post-calving.
So it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Have we been tackling the symptom instead of the cause for decades?
That's the question.
The traditional approach relies on tubes and sealants. You're trying to wall off the infection risk after the cow is already stressed out. This new approach, it targets the stress itself.
Yeah.
That's a fundamental paradigm shift.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive right into the core biological issue here. When we look at traditional dry-off, we are talking about taking a highly productive animal, a cow making 60, 80, maybe even 100 pounds of milk a day.
And just slamming on the brakes, hitting the stop button overnight.
Exactly. The core issue, the biological crisis, is that abrupt pressure that builds up in the udder.
Hold on, though. From a farmer's perspective, we accept that pressure. We see the engorgement, we adjust the diet, and we just assume the cow is uncomfortable for maybe 2-3 days.
Right.
But we see it as a necessary evil to trigger involution, the natural drying down of the gland. We usually just monitor them closely during that time. What's the actual damage being done during those few uncomfortable days?
That visible discomfort you're seeing.
Yeah.
It's actually translating into a specific, measurable biological crisis, a crisis that triggers infection. The data shows that udder pressure remains dangerously elevated for several days.
Not just a few hours.
No days. And this isn't just physical discomfort, it's hormonal distress. Research from AHV, they collaborated with Utrecht University, and they really pinpointed this causal chain.
Okay.
The stress hormones released by the abrupt dry-off, we're talking primarily cortisol, they act as a biological trigger.
So the stress we are intentionally inducing is what's causing the downstream problem.
It is.
We're not just dealing with the physical pressure, we're dealing with the cow's own internal chemistry turning against her own defenses.
Precisely. That pressure and the resulting spike in cortisol and other stress hormones, it actually changes the chemical environment inside the udder. And this change acts as a signal. It's a wake-up call, if you will.
A wake-up call for what?
For dormant bacterial populations that are already living inside the udder pathogens you might have missed or thought you had under control during the last lactation.
That's where it gets critical, because we're not just dealing with new infections coming in through the teat end from the environment.
No.
We're dealing with internal residents. We're talking about existing chronic mastitis bacteria that are basically using the stress hormones we induce to launch a coordinated attack.
And those existing bacteria, they're highly organized. They aren't just floating around free. They are hiding in these structures called biofilms.
Okay, explain biofilms.
Think of a biofilm not just as a clump of bacteria, but as a densely packed protective city, like a bacterial castle, complete with layers of slime and protective architecture.
So they're shielded.
Highly shielded. And that detailed data point here is critical for every producer listening. Bacteria protected in these structures can be 10 times or sometimes much, much more resistant to our best antibiotics in experimental settings.
Okay, now that connects the dots. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why we see antibiotic failure.
Yes.
I've experienced it on my own farm. You treat a chronic cow aggressively at dry-off, you use the tube, you use the sealant, and yet she calves in with a mastitis flare a month later, or the infection just persists. If the bacteria are hiding in a biofilm,
The most potent dry cow therapy is just scratching the surface of that protective castle.
it can't get in.
This isn't just some proprietary speculation either. This is established microbial science, supported by work from institutions like Cornell's Quality Milk Production Services, Ohio State, and others. The traditional dry-off method provides the exact stress signal, that cortisol spike from udder engorgement, that tell those organized biofilms it's time to activate and multiply.
The anecdotal evidence here really brings this home. It connects the science right back to the parlor. Steve Yeager's quote about his experience after traditional dry-off protocols is, it's genuinely haunting.
It is.
He said that his cows were screaming. Just screaming. You could tell the udders were full. They were uncomfortable. And now, with the new protocol, he says the barn is silent.
That vocalization, the screaming, that's the visible, audible sign of the pressure and the stress hormone release. If the science is right, then reducing the pressure, and thus the stress hormones, is the only way to stop that biological signal from activating those biofilm-dwelling bacteria.
A silent barn means a healthy, stress-free metabolic transition. It drastically reduces that biological cost.
So let's think about the implications for different operation sizes.
Right.
If you're a smaller farm, relying on every single cow, reducing death losses by nearly half, like the trial data suggests, is crucial for survival.
You just can't absorb that. You can't absorb the loss of genetics and production potential that a 2% mortality rate represents.
And for large operations, the scale of the problem shifts. It becomes about mass treatment failure and labor. If you're managing hundreds of dry cows, and the underlying bacterial populations are becoming 10 times more resistant because your dry-off method is intentionally triggering them.
You're just burning money on antibiotics that are destined to fail from the start. And then there's the labor, the hours spent dealing with chronic fresh cow issues, the hospital pens, the aggressive culling. It just spirals out of control.
It moves from an animal health issue to an inefficiency catastrophe.
Okay, let's pivot. We've established the problem.
Yeah.
Abrupt dry-off creates stress. Stress wakes up these bacterial biofilms, and the infection that results is really hard to treat. Now we need to ask, why did this innovation emerge from the Netherlands? Every farmer I know has been using tubes and sealants for decades. That is the accepted protocol. Why did a vet like Dr. Goodrich-Cylon and an innovator like Jan de Rooij start looking completely outside that established drug-based box?
It was driven by sheer necessity and regulatory constraint. The traditional methods relying so heavily on blanket antibiotic dry cow therapy, they just weren't cutting it anymore. Antibiotics were failing too often. Dr. Striefland, as a vet, kept encountering these failures and realized he had to question the core mechanism of infection, moving beyond just, increasing the drug dosage.
And this is where the Bolvine's contrarian analysis comes in the context of the Dutch lesson. We in North America, historically, if production dips or losses climb, what do? We often mitigate it through expansion.
Or we replace with higher genetics.
Right.
Or just adjust volume.
Right. We can expand our way out of a problem.
The Dutch didn't have that luxury. Their land costs were, and are, astronomical. And critically, they were constrained by strict national production quotas right up until 2015.
So they literally could not afford to expand their way out of a problem.
Exactly. This forced them to maximize the efficiency, the longevity, and the production of every single cow they already had. They couldn't afford a single preventable loss, which forced them to question these traditional methods that were considered good enough everywhere else.
Efficiency wasn't a luxury for them. It was the only condition for survival. That makes perfect sense. They needed a non-drug solution that fundamentally improved cow health because they couldn't just discard cows or treat their way through failure.
And the breakthrough science emerged when Jan de Rooij, the innovator, attended a course on bacterial communication.
What microbiologists call quorum sensing.
That's the key piece of the puzzle. It connects the dry-off stress directly to the infection outcome.
Okay, talk to me about quorum sensing. In plain English, for a farmer listening, what does that mean?
Think of it like a bacterial military strategy. They use these chemical walkie-talkies. Bacteria don't just attack as disorganized individuals.
They coordinate.
They coordinate. They release chemical signaling molecules into their environment. They monitor these signals, and they wait for the concentration to reach a critical mass, what they call the quorum.
Okay.
Once enough bacteria are present and they get that chemical signal, which in this case includes the stress hormones from the cow, they realize, okay, we have enough troops, the coast is clear, and the defenses are low. Time to launch a coordinated massive attack.
So traditional dry-off, by inducing that extreme pressure and high cortisol, essentially provides the specific go signal the biofilm army was waiting for.
You got it. It changes the entire paradigm of mastitis management. If you're treating individual bacteria, you fail. If the entire population is waiting for a stress signal to launch a coordinated attack, you have to disrupt the communication, not just try to kill the numbers after the fact.
Okay, I'm still a skeptical farmer. You say this new metabolic approach is different. I've heard about additives and treatments promising magic for decades. My protocol is simple. Tube, sealant, done. How can I be sure that my staff, who are already overworked, can handle a protocol that relies on some, metabolic signal? What is the actual mechanism of stop-lack that achieves this?
That's the perfect question, because the difference isn't a silver bullet. It's a guided physiological change. The mechanism focuses on the rapid removal of lactose from the udder.
Lactose, the primary food source for bacteria.
The primary food source. Traditional dry-off leaves a massive amount of lactose just sitting in a high-pressure environment for days.
Which turns the udder into a perfect bacterial incubator. It's got the food, the warmth, and the stress signal all at once.
Right. This new metabolic approach, with its proprietary nutritional components, doesn't try to just seal the udder. It sends a signal to the mammary gland cells themselves. It accelerates the natural involution process, resulting in a documented 56% drop in milk production within just 24 hours.
56% in one day.
And critically, this drop is achieved because the lactose is rapidly reabsorbed by the cow system before the pressure can build up significantly.
So it's not a physical suppression of milk flow. It's a physiological signal telling the cow system to shut down lactose production gently and reabsorb what's already there. No lactose means no bacterial food, and no pressure means no cortisol spike.
Precisely. And that means the barn is quiet because the system is shutting down smoothly. John Beller, he's running 2,400 cows in Wisconsin. He confirmed this. He noted, A lot less vocalization during the dry-off period. The cows cease production almost instantly with no more milk secretion after dry-up.
He is seeing the quiet confirmation that the pressure crisis has been averted.
You tackle the problem upstream, at the metabolic level, and you eliminate the biological trigger for the biofilms. Let's move entirely to the balance sheet now. That $640 benefit per cow isn't a vague claim. It's a synthesis of avoided losses and gained production derived from real-world trials. And we need to be specific because farmers mentally lump these costs into a single transition loss category.
Yeah, let's do the line item expenses for the traditional preventable costs first. Because to justify investing in a new protocol, a farmer needs to see clearly what they are currently losing every single year.
Okay, we'll start with the $340.45 in traditional preventable dry-off losses. These are the costs directly associated with the failure of that old stress-inducing protocol.
Go ahead, give me the breakdown.
Okay, starting small, we have the visible loss of milk leakage. That adds up to about $11.55 per cow.
Okay.
More substantially, new infections, both clinical and subclinical mastitis, average $94.
94, that's a big jump.
Then we hit the major categories. Extra culling cows that just don't make it to the next lactation or get culled early due to chronic issues. That is the largest chunk at a measurable $120.
$120 per cow per year just from unnecessary culling is.
Yeah, he's huge.
That represents lost genetic potential and the cost of bringing in a replacement.
Absolutely. Moving on, death losses within 60 days post-calving average $66.
56.
Then you have the direct costs of managing the failure, antibiotics, and the cost of withdrawal time, which we estimate at $32.90.
Okay.
And finally, the extra labor. Dealing with these complex fresh cow and chronic mastitis problems, at least $16 per cow.
So add all that up, and we've established that the accepted cost of running a traditional dry-off protocol that induces metabolic stress is $340.45 per cow in measurable loss.
Right.
That's staggering when you multiply it across a whole herd. Now let's talk investment. What does this new metabolic protocol actually cost the producer?
The investment is manageable, especially relative to the savings. The cost of the core component, stop lac, is about $38.50 per dose.
Okay.
When you factor in all the related implementation and delivery costs, you're looking at a total investment of somewhere between $55 to $60 per cow.
Okay, so the cost-benefit analysis starts right there. You invest $55 to $60 to avoid $340 in pretty much guaranteed problems. That's a return of 5 to 6 times the investment just on prevention.
Just on stopping the bad stuff from happening.
But the $640 total benefit implies there's another major component to the gain something beyond just avoiding the bad stuff.
That's the other side of the coin. The gain is the improved performance and overall cow health that results from a non-stressed dry period. So the total economic benefit, around $640 per cow, is derived from 1, avoiding that $340 in traditional costs, and 2, gaining over $400 in improved early lactation performance, reduced health events, and better reproductive success. The prevention isn't just stopping a loss, it's fueling a massive gain in productivity.
And here's the long-term compounding factor that every producer should be focusing on. If the cow's udder heals faster because it wasn't traumatized by days of high pressure, she enters the next lactation cycle in much better shape, both metabolically and immunologically.
The production advantage is massive, and it's measurable. 6.7 pounds more daily milk during the first 100 days in milk. That's what the trials showed.
Wow.
That's a sustained surge in early lactation profitability that starts compounding immediately.
And it stands to reason biologically. I mean, if the udder doesn't suffer high pressure, tissue damage, and a huge inflammatory response, it can dedicate its dry period entirely to healing and regeneration.
Steve Yeager observed this. He said shrinking the udder faster allows more time for that regeneration, and that leads those cows to take off faster and perform significantly better in the next cycle.
Let's put this in perspective. How does this ROI compare to other proven methods we already use?
Well, selective dry cow therapy, which is an excellent practice, might reduce your antibiotic cost by 50%. That's a great goal.
Sure.
Internal teat sealants, they offer a solid ROI, maybe 200, 300%. But stop lac, according to these trial results, it delivers a benefit that's over 10 times the investment.
And why?
Because it addresses the systemic problem of stress and bacterial activation, rather than just treating the consequences. It's a systemic approach.
So the key takeaway from the financial analysis is that dry-off isn't a holding pattern where we just accept losses anymore. It's an investment opportunity that determines the profitability of the next lactation.
Okay, let's move from the economic theory to the hard, boots-on-the-ground data.
The proof.
The proof.
Yeah.
The Wisconsin trials with those 404 cows, they validated the biological hypothesis that a calm dry-off is a healthy dry-off. I mean, the difference in milk leakage alone was huge.
What were the numbers?
1.7% in the metabolic group versus 7.6% in the traditional control group.
That's a huge visual and sanitation difference for your staff. Less leakage means cleaner pens, less potential for environmental mastitis coming through, and just fewer cows requiring intervention in the dry lot.
But the death loss reduction is, I think, arguably the most powerful data point.
Yeah.
Death losses within 60 days post-calving were 1.3% in the intervention group versus 2.4% in the control group.
You're reducing mortality by nearly half. That just screams reduced metabolic stress and better overall immune function going into the next lactation, especially when a cow is facing the immense challenge of calving.
Exactly.
Let's analyze the stress test case, because this is where the theory truly met reality during the H5N1 outbreak at Joe Soares Farms in California. This comparison is truly eye-opening because it measures resilience under a massive external crisis.
Joe Soares had two major facilities. Their Turlock facility, running about 2,500 cows, had already adopted the AHV metabolic protocol for dry-off. When H5N1 hit the area, the Turlock facility maintained production remarkably well. They stayed around 88 pounds of milk daily, with monthly mortality losses around 40 to 60 cows.
They weathered the storm.
They weathered the storm. Now, compare that to their Chowchilla facility. It was running 5,500 cows using traditional abrupt dry-off protocols.
And when the stress hit,
Their production dropped sharply, from the high 80s all the way down to 77 pounds per day. And critically, they were losing over 100 cows per month.
100 a month. That difference is astonishing. It's not just about mastitis prevention, it's about overall metabolic resiliency.
It seems like the reduced stress from the gentler dry-off gave the Turlock cows the reserve capacity and the immune system strength they needed to handle a massive external challenge like H5N1 far better than the cows that were already metabolically stressed by the abrupt dry-off process at Chowchilla.
It connects the dots perfectly back to the foundational science. If traditional dry-off creates a significant, measurable internal stress and a higher biological burden, activated biofilms, elevated cortisol, then the cow is already running on empty when a disease like H5N1 or even severe heat stress hits.
Right.
The metabolic protocol allowed the Turlock cows to start the lactation cycle healthier with a fuller tank of immune reserves.
It highlights the core long-term benefit.
Yeah.
You're not just treating mastitis, you're preparing the whole cow for stress, whatever form it takes, calving, disease, or extreme weather.
But here's my challenge, and it's the one every farmer listening is thinking about right now. Implementation time and labor. We are all stretched thin. If this process requires extra steps, extra training, or adds another hour to my dry-off routine, the labor cost is going to quickly eat into that $640 benefit. Yeah. How complicated is the actual application?
That's a valid skepticism, and the source material directly addresses it with real-world testimony.
Yeah.
David Goodrich, he runs 180 cows. He found the implementation surprisingly smooth. He noted, "I don't think it takes really any more time than putting tubes and sealants in every cow."
Really?
He went on to say, "I actually think it might cut a step out. Employees have really liked that they don't have to handle the cows twice in the parlor."
Wait, why would it cut a step out? How does that work?
Well, traditional protocols often involve two distinct steps, right? You've got the antibiotic tube, and then you have the internal sealant. If you are using the metabolic protocol, and you can eliminate the routine use of the internal sealant for many of your cows, you save that labor step. Reduced handling is reduced stress, both for the cow and the staff. If they are moving away from the sealant application on every single cow, that's a genuine time saver in a high turnover environment.
Exactly.
That is significant. Labor is often the biggest limiting factor on large farms. Less handling, less fuss, less risk of human error during application. However, we have to acknowledge the bumps in the road that were reported. This isn't a flawless transition for everyone. One producer reported needing about 3 weeks for his staff to truly get comfortable with the new protocol, to understand the importance of the timing and the delivery method.
Okay.
And another operation struggled because they tried to implement it during their busiest season. You just can't rush new management evolution like this.
That 3-week adjustment period is crucial information. Producers need to budget for that mentally and operationally. You can't just throw a new protocol at your staff during harvest or peak calving and expect perfection. Success requires dedicated training time and a calm environment for that initial learning curve.
And once that initial learning curve is passed, the confidence builds, and that leads to sustained compliance. Goodrich noted, "I have no difference in cell count or fresh cows with mastitis. I find it works really well on the farm, and I have no plans of going back to using tubes and sealants and all that stuff anymore."
That confidence ensures the protocol sticks long enough for the farm to realize those compounded efficiency gains.
Let's shift our focus now to the regulatory landscape, because this innovation isn't just about efficiency. It's about positioning your farm for the inevitable future of dairy production. The pressure to reduce antibiotic use is only accelerating globally. It's driven by consumer concerns and government mandates.
Yeah, we can't ignore the European example. The EU's Regulation 2196 took effect in January 2022. It effectively banned blanket dry cow therapy. Farmers over there must now prove the need for every single antibiotic tube they use.
Every single one.
And Canada also has clear national objectives to drastically reduce antibiotic use in agriculture. This trend is already mandatory in key global markets. It's coming.
This is where the zero withdrawal advantage of a non-drug metabolic approach becomes a massive competitive edge, even here in the US, where blanket therapy is still permitted for now. Because this metabolic wind-down has zero withdrawal time, it immediately positions farms ahead of tightening consumer demands, especially if you're supplying specialized markets, and any potential regulatory changes coming down the pike.
And think about the consumer transparency movement. Being able to market your product and your management practices as proactively managing cow health through metabolic signaling, rather than relying on blanket drug administration. That's a powerful narrative.
It really is.
It demonstrates a commitment to animal welfare and reduced pharmaceutical reliance that consumers are looking for.
What about regional differences, though? Does the success of reducing metabolic stress vary based on climate or operational style?
I'm a little skeptical that a cow in the humid extreme heat of the Southeast sees the same benefit as a cow in the dry climate of the Southwest. I mean, environment plays such a huge role in immune function.
That's a fair point, but the sources suggest the mechanism is universally beneficial because it addresses the internal stress, which then allows the cow to better handle those external pressures.
So in the Southeast,
where heat stress is a constant battle, reducing metabolic stress during dry-off is incredibly beneficial. The cow isn't battling high pressure internally and high temperatures externally. You're freeing up her metabolic resources to manage the heat.
And conversely, in the Southwest, where the environmental challenges are more about dust and dirt, the strong, uncompromised immune response you get from avoiding dry-off stress is the advantage.
Right.
If the cow enters the dry period healthier and leaves it healthier, her ability to handle environmental pathogens is naturally boosted. That should result in lower incidence of environmental mastitis post-calving.
It fundamentally changes the risk calculation. You're addressing the internal fragility caused by the traditional dry-off, which then allows the cow to better handle external pressures, no matter if that's heat, dust, or an infectious disease like H5N1.
So let's look at the competitive landscape. AHV reports over 2,600 farms have switched to this management evolution. If my neighbor is achieving $640 in compounding efficiency gains, cutting their fresh cow losses in half, how does that change the market competition for me?
It's a huge shift.
We're talking about an industry trend that will lead to a significant efficiency gap between the early adopters and those who stick with tradition.
It means that the cost of not changing increases every single year. Your neighbors are gaining that $640 in efficiency, they're experiencing better conception rates and lower mortality, while you are still accepting that $340 in preventable losses. The competitive disadvantage becomes massive, and it's measured on pounds of milk, lives of cows saved, and ultimately your dollars per hundredweight produced. We've established that this metabolic management approach presents a huge opportunity for economic and animal health gains. But the bovine is about practical reality, not blind hype. So let's address the reality. Not every farm is ready for this significant management evolution.
No, I'm not buying that every farm can just jump into this tomorrow. This is a highly sophisticated preventative approach. If you're going to use a method that relies on proactive metabolic management and zero withdrawal, You need a highly compliant system.
Absolutely.
We've been trained for decades to rely on the antibiotic tube as a safety net. Taking that safety net away requires absolute confidence in your protocols.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head. The operations that succeed with this usually have specific foundational systems already in place. First, they must be closely tracking individual cow data.
You need to know exactly who is a repeat offender and who isn't.
And compliance is non-negotiable. Your staff needs to consistently follow the process perfectly every single time. If you have high staff turnover or, loose protocols in the parlor, introducing this level of precise management could actually increase your initial failure rates until that compliance issue is solved.
And they also need to be thinking in full lactations, not just quarterly financial numbers.
That's a huge point.
If you're focused only on immediate costs, that $55 to $60 investment per cow might feel painful in the short term, and you risk missing the compounding benefits that only show up 6, 9, or 12 months down the road, like the reduced culling and the improved conception rates.
So who should wait?
I'd advise producers who are tracking finances month to month, relying on that immediate cash flow stability, to be cautious. The investment might feel too big without seeing that immediate return. And those without solid individual cow tracking, if you don't know who your repeat offenders are, or if your fresh cow monitoring is weak, you might struggle to truly measure the benefit initially and then lose faith in the system.
My advice would be, if those foundational systems aren't solid, focus on building those first. Get comfortable with data-driven decision-making, with staff compliance, with rigorous tracking before you introduce a new protocol that relies on that data to prove its worth and guide its implementation.
And that leads us to the critical mindset shift. This is not just about buying a new product, it's about management evolution. You are changing how the cow biologically manages the end of her lactation. You're proactively managing her internal environment.
The Dutch lesson serves as the final provocative thought here. When you can't expand your way out of problems, when you can't just replace poor performers quickly, innovation becomes essential. It forces you to get smarter with the assets you already have, maximizing the potential of every single cow you dry off. And that is exactly what this metabolic approach delivers.
All right, so a farmer just finished morning milking, they're driving to the feed store, or maybe they're just grabbing lunch. Based on the science of these biofilms, the $640 savings, and the silent barn data, what are the 3 key actionable takeaways they need to implement now?
Okay, we need to structure this by time frame. What can you do immediately? What's the strategy for the medium term? And how does this position your operation for the long term?
Let's start with immediate action, what they can do this week without spending a single dime. Number 1, immediate action this week. Pay attention to your dry pen. Stop and actively listen. Is the barn screaming or is it silent right after dry off? Use that vocalization as a physiological indicator of pressure, stress, and potential biofilm activation. If you hear screaming, you are seeing the direct physiological cost of your current protocol. At the same time, use your existing data to identify those chronic repeat offenders for mastitis. Those are the cows that you should target first for any trial or shift to a metabolic protocol.
Excellent. Now, moving into the medium term, once they have that data and are considering the investment in the staff training.
Number 2, medium-term strategy, next 3 to 6 months. Target a calmer season for implementation. Do not try to roll this out during your busiest 3-week window. Give your staff the bandwidth they need for that initial 3-week adjustment period to run smoothly and ensure compliance. If you do it successfully, monitor your hospital pen closely. You should expect to see reduced numbers of fresh cows requiring treatment and, crucially, start tracking conception rates. The trial data suggests you'll see improved reproductive performance in the months following implementation.
And finally, the long-term positioning. This is the big picture, the compounded benefit that really leads to profitability.
Number 3, long-term positioning, next 1 to 2 years. Track the compounding financial effects of this efficiency gain. The goal is to see that sustained 6.7 pounds of daily milk advantage across your herd and drastically reduce treatment and culling costs. The cumulative effect of fewer deaths, fewer infections, and better overall performance is what drives cash flow improvement. By month 12, the goal isn't just that you notice the difference, but that your banker notices the improved cash flow because your cost structure and your production reliability have fundamentally changed. This has been another deep dive from the Bovine Podcast, challenging the fundamental assumptions we make about cow health and productivity during the most critical phase of the lactation cycle. If this kind of sharp, actionable analysis helps your operation, head to www.thebulvine.com for more articles that tell you what's really happening in dairy.
And seriously, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're releasing episodes twice weekly now because the pace of change and the need for rigorous, evidence-based analysis in this industry demand constant information. We just demonstrated how a proactive, metabolic approach to dry-off can generate compounding benefits: $640 in efficiency, better production, and fewer deaths. We will continue bringing you hard-hitting analysis that translates directly into operational savings. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.